Okay. Oh, can you see
And
me?
hello, everyone. Welcome to Reformed Catholic, as is my name. No, I'm not a papist, but going, we'll be challenging or and refuting the papist view in within church history. So I'll have a look whether we are live, or just to double check I can hear myself.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I can't seem to see Doc Lido there
Yeah.
for
I
some
can,
reason.
can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Oh, okay.
I can't seem to on the live stream. I can't seem to see you for
No.
some
Okay. I
reason.
can see myself too. Shall I come back?
Hold on one second.
Mm-hmm.
I'll see whether you could. Yeah, just try to come back and see whether we can see you. I'm not sure why
Okay.
we can't
Stay
see
there.
you. Yeah.
I'll come back.
Okay. Well, we're having some difficulties at this moment, guys. Thanks for joining us. Please stand by. It's a cold night in Melbourne. Give us a comment below where you're watching from. I'm assuming from the US. Majority. Oh, he's back. Let's see if we can.
Yeah. Here you go. How are
We
you?
can. All right. Let's see. All right. There we are. We can see you,
Yep.
and we can put you on, and you can put in the layout screen.
Okay.
Uh,
You want to present?
actually, you got the uh PowerPoint ready?
Yeah. Do you want me to present
Yes.
on my
Please
end?
go ahead.
Okay. I'll do the presentation then. Hold on a second.
Yeah.
Um,
I know I've got to share the screen.
yeah.
There
Let me
we go.
see.
Yep.
Can you see
Add
that?
to stage, and there we are.
Oh,
Okay.
sorry. Wait.
We're off.
That's development of
We're
Marian
off and
Dogma.
we're off and kicking.
Wait, that's a different one. Okay.
Oh, wrong one.
Let-
This is going well.
Okay, Google Slides it says here. Okay.
Yep. That
Google
is,
Slide.
we'll be touching on that within. That sure is. What? We'll be touching on that later on, maybe within a few weeks, because we can redo that. But
Yes. But
yes,
it's um share screen.
a bit of a
Okay. I'll share screen.
mini intro, I guess. Yeah.
Okay. And I think this is the one I should share. That one there. Okay. I'll share that. See whether you could see it.
Okay. Yes, I can see it.
Can you see it
Remove
now?
and yes.
Yes, that's the one. Okay. I'll see whether I could do a slideshow on this one. Okay. Yes, that's the one. All right. Rise of the Papacy is our topic today. So, shall I just continue, Daniel?
Yes, go ahead.
Daniel. Okay. So, this presentation is a discussion of the papacy and what are the claims. Of course, these are Roman Catholic claims, and in the three tradition mainstream of Christianity, there are two streams that don't accept this. Right, the Orthodox don't accept this, and the Protestants don't accept this. Now we'll define what the papacy is, but let's put a background story to this one. Um, I'm showing you right now the first 3 or 4 lines of a work done by Melanchthon. This is found in the Book of Concord on the power and primacy of the Pope. And what is the papacy? It's a claim that the Roman bishop or Roman Pope claims for himself that by divine right he is the supreme bishop of all bishops and pastors in Christendom. That's what it means. In other words, it's making a claim that the Roman Pope should be the leader of all Christians in all of those three streams and traditions. Okay, in other words, the Orthodox should accept this, the Protestants should accept this as the leader of Christendom. That's a big claim. Okay, and so And the second one is that he adds also that by divine right, now this is given to him by God, and he has both swords, authority to kingdoms, and also both secular and sacred kingdoms, basically. Not only is he supposed to be the ruler of the sacred kingdom of God, but also the secular kingdom. And the thirdly, he says that to believe this is necessary for salvation. And for these reasons, the Roman bishop calls himself the vicar of Christ on earth. These are the third claim is a strong claim, and you can hear some Roman Catholic apologists in the internet make this claim that if you don't believe that he is the vicar of Christ, then you are not saved. So things like that come into play. So, but before we get ahead of ourselves, it's better that we um, talk about some terms, some vocabularies, okay, or definitions. Okay. So first thing is that the word pope. Okay, we need to understand first the notion of the term pope. Okay, the word pope is the English form or English equivalent of the word papa in ancient Greek, or papas. Okay, in in um, in a way, okay, that we know our children call us papa. Some children call their fathers papa, mama, meaning father, basically. But this is a specific title given to the Bishop of Rome. So it says here in Wikipedia, the visible head of the Catholic Church. And we're going to talk about the Catholic Church, the one with capital C and the one with small c later on. Uh, so the Roman pontiff or the supreme pontiff. Now, we'll talk about the word pontiff uh, um, later on. But in the long and short of it is the word pope is the word used for the bishop of Rome. Interestingly, you don't call the metropolitan of a particular Orthodox stream pope, or they might be called father by their constituents. Okay, but in their circles, they don't call the bishop of Alexandria, for example, or bishop of Saint Petersburg, uh, Pope. Okay, they don't do that. So it's only exclusive title to the one that the bishop that is sitting in Rome, in the Vatican. So the papacy then refers to the sovereignty of the Pope over its papal states. And you know that the Vatican is a state. It's got its own ambassadors. Okay, you can to countries, the Papa Nuncio, for example, and uh, and so on. And you can a country can have an ambassador to the Vatican because it's a state. Now that's not only the realm of the Pope, but it's supposed to for sure now, of course, his realm extends to the Roman Catholics who believe that he is a vicar of Christ. So um, he has a secular uh, domain, the Papal States in Italy. The Vatican is a part of that, and also he rules, or the pastor supreme pastor of all Roman Catholics all over the world, wherever you might be in EU, USA, Australia, Canada. You're supposed to be subject to the Vicar of Christ. So now the word papacy is the claim that the Pope or the Bishop of Rome has sovereign rule over all Christendom, which we read already from Melanchthon's opening remarks on his treatise. It said that what are the claims? Well, here first claim: Peter is claimed to have been made by Jesus as his supreme apostle. In other words, uh, all the apostles, Paul, James, John, are supposed to be under the leadership of Peter, or the command of Peter, in a sense. Okay. Um, Peter is claimed to have been given the keys to heaven by the Lord Jesus. A third claim is Peter is the rock upon which the church is built. Um, this is found in Matthew 16:13 to 19. And if
And that's
we,
that's a
hmm,
stretch. That's a
yeah,
stretch. If I may comment here,
yes, yes, go ahead, please.
that's a stretch. Matthew 16. I know it's what 18 and 19 or roughly around that. Yeah,
Yes,
Matthew chapter 16. But
yeah,
specifically, that reference is uh, Matthew 16, 18, verse 18.
yes,
And that's a lot to get from that, to say that Peter is given the keys to heaven. Peter is the rock upon the built his church, the church is built, and that Jesus basically saying he's the Pope. That's a lot to put all that in there. And I don't, the fathers don't really say that at all, right?
no, no, we will see
And
that. Yeah,
to say that the Pope's infallible, the papal infallibility, of course, I know the year when papal infallibility came was like 1870. Just, yeah, go ahead and,
correct. Yes. So that's you've said something that we'll touch upon. Really, there are two main things that they have to prove, and the jump from one to the other, that jump is a big jump. Okay, in logic or in justification, philosophical justification, basically, these are all philosophical justification, you might say. Um, See it here, this jump here. Peter is claimed to have passed this office to the Bishop of Rome. Okay. In other words, his successor isn't Peter's successor isn't one of the 12 or one of the 11. Okay. Peter's successor is the one that is down there on the seat of the Vatican, basically sitting on the chair there. So uh, thus the Pope has divine right to rule over Christendom. So that is the claim, basically. Okay, that's how we, um, um, and you will see some faithful Roman Catholics. They know that their allegiance is supposed to be with uh, with the with the with the Pope. So anyway, so another thing that we need to look into is the word Catholic. Okay, which is universal. uh, Technically, the word Catholic, small c, means universal. It's all inclusive of all ethnicities, okay, background, rich or poor, slave or free. That's what means to be universal or Catholic. Okay. Now, the capitalized Catholic is basically in reference to now the institution which is seated in Rome. Okay, whose center is the Vatican, um, who identifies with the Pope, or well, they call themselves the capital Catholic Church. Okay, so there is a switch from ordinary word Catholic, meaning universal, to the word Catholic, which is uh, kind of self-absorbed or self-attested uh, absorption of that terminology by uh, people who follow the Bishop of Rome. Um, Technically, for from 100 AD to 500 AD, there wasn't th- everybody during that time was Catholic, small c. Okay, the Christian faith is for everybody, for everyone. So the first 100 to um, 100 AD to 500 AD, uh, everybody was, of course, Catholic. Okay, and even beyond that. Okay, the origin of the term and its earliest uses was 107 AD from Ignatius of Antioch. Ignatius of Antioch made mention of the word Catholic in one of his letters. Now, Ignatius has several letters. There's a swag of letters which people make claims. Oh, I became Roman Catholic because I read Ignatius of Antioch.
Oh,
That
yes,
sort
we've
of.
heard that many times, specifically
But
the Eucharist, right?
yeah, but in as much as we have to go into church history to find out what the early Christians believe in, we must be aware too. We must be uh, not overly trusting, because some of these writings of Ignatius of Antioch are now deemed forgeries. Okay, they are now deemed by some scholars. Okay, it depends on which scholar you. Some people believe that these are forgeries. So it's simply because a writing is purported to be early doesn't mean it's authentic, because we know that the New Testament authors, Saint Paul and Saint John and all of the Saint Jude, for example, all of these apostles wrote about and warned the church. The word church is basically called out once, right? Those called out by God to become His people uh, under the lordship of the Lord Jesus Christ. And so, um, simply because you found a document uh, early doesn't mean that it is genuine or authentic. It could have been faked. Okay, so we have to be careful with that. Okay, and that's why um, you cannot be just be untrusting. Now, so what were the believers in Jesus Christ called pre 100 AD? Well, according to Acts, they were called Christians. They were called Nazarenes. Okay, or followers of the way. You can read this in the book of Acts, several times mentioned there. Okay. In fact, at Antioch, that's where the believers were first called Christians. Okay. They were not called Catholic. Okay. They were called Christians. Okay. So there you go. First off the bat there. So the question is, was there a papacy since the early Christian period, like one AD to 300 AD, for example? Yeah. Did the Christians believe the Bishop of Rome to be supreme? The first 300 years. And we will go into several arguments in here that um, doesn't seem to be the case. Okay. So some historians distinguish Roman Catholicism from from Catholicism, or small c. Okay. And why do they do this? In as much as the doctrines of the Roman Catholic Church has not been seen by them in the early Christian period, they believe the RCC has a beginning. Now, of course, the RCC always claims that no, we're the original ones. We don't have a beginning. We're the ones that Jesus, Saint Peter uh, founded, and so on and so on. There's self appropriation that we're the one true church. Okay, self attestation, you might call. Um, but the reason why some historians are um, uh, questioning this or don't believe this, that and rather they believe that you can mark in history where the Roman Catholic Church really began, uh, is because of these doctrines such as the Mariology found in the RCC, Roman Catholic Church, her veneration or service, and so on. The doctrine of purgatory, for example, the infallibility of the Pope and their councils, the veneration and prayers to the saint. One historian, I mean, there are several historians that we could name. Um, Philip Schaff, for example, I know for one, Philip Schaff read his pieces of his book, okay, very large volume on Christian church history. He pegged the start of the Roman Catholic Church at 590 AD, when Pope Gregory, or the Bishop Gregory the First, claim the papal states. Okay, and uh, okay, yes, all right. There's a mention that just called the Church of Rome. Okay, Roman is yes. All right,
Romanist,
thanks for that.
Papist, we could call them something like that, yeah. Well,
I
we are
try
the
to
true
never call them
Catholics,
Cal.
right? We're the true, that's wrong.
Okay, yeah.
This is what
Thanks,
we should
Chris.
call ourselves, Catholic
Yeah,
University or
yeah.
Orthodox.
So yes, no worries. Okay, so yeah, so there we'll refer to them as, of course, the Romanists now. Okay, so um, two, two,
Or
two
Papist,
things.
whichever. Yes,
Yes.
Papist is good too. We should have a vote. Romanist or Papist or both, doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Yes, we that's very good.
Okay. So two things must be established by the RCC to make this claim float. Okay. First one is Peter is the primate of the apostles. He was the rock. That's the first one. And the second one is that Peter handed over his headship to the Bishop of Rome. So those two are, I mean, um, first thing is that you might be able to, let's say for the sake of argument, you might be able to make the claim Peter was the rock. Okay, all right. Assume for the sake of argument that you were able to make that stick. Okay, um, and you were able to prove that, but that doesn't mean number two follows from that. You have to make uh, another argument and with facts that this is what happened. This is that Peter handed over his headship not to James, his contemporary, not to John, his contemporary, not to Matthew, okay, not to Bartholomew, not to Saint Thomas, for example, but to the Bishop of Rome, okay. So that's another leap, which I think Daniel, you alluded to that, okay. So lots of biblical passages mitigate against this. For example, the rock, even Roman Catholics or Romanist priests believe that the rock there in Matthew 16:13 to 19 isn't Peter, but the confession of Peter, but the confession about Jesus the rock, okay, or about Jesus as the Messiah. That's the rock, and Jesus is the rock. For example, about upon himself. In other words, isn't he
If
called
I can
the
interrupt,
rock
Doc,
that
there.
followed you? The children of
Yes.
Israel. Okay, go ahead, Daniel.
One thing is, if the papacy was universal, and everyone knew about the Pope, as the Roman Catholics would like to, or Romanists would like to, for us to think, then why is it that a lot of all the quotes on Matthew 16:18 is not about, like, they all agree that Peter is the rock in which was the church built and his papal infallibility. Why isn't no one held to that view? It's not that simple. If that is
Yeah.
the case, but we don't
Yes.
see that. That's on them.
No.
They claim the church is the church that is now, and there's a lot of development. But of course, that's where I find the issue. The burden of proof is on them, but I
Yes.
don't see a lot of the fathers saying this. Right? There's a lot of quotes. Even I think it was Saint Augustine,
Yeah.
maybe even St. Chrysostom, saying that the rock is Peter's confession, but not
Yeah.
Peter himself. So he's not the Pope in their eyes. But I mean, if the Pope was universal, then they would have a unanimous view and all would agree with it. But it's not the case, right? Which
Yeah.
I find the problem for them. This is the
Yeah.
problem.
Yes. So many things mitigate against this. For example, the keys of binding and loosing. You know about the keys was given to all disciples because the you there is plural. Jesus wasn't addressing Peter. Okay. Um, in 18 to 80, Matthew 18, 18, 20, he was talking to them about all of them. Whatever you bind on earth shall be bound in heaven. Okay? You, the church as a group, okay, the disciples, okay. In the first council, Acts 15 2 to 35, the first council of Jerusalem, it was James who gave the final decision, not Peter. Okay? Peter gave evidence, okay, but he wasn't the one who made the final call, okay, telling the Gentile Christians, stay away from idols, stay away from things strangled the blood, stay away from sexual fornication, for example. It was James who made this call, not Peter. Okay. In fact, Peter was on the side there, making a just making a witness, or just giving evidence. He wasn't the one who made the call of that church in Jerusalem. And then number four, Paul rebuked Peter in Galatians 2:11 to 14. That doesn't look like a rock to me. Okay, that's very. Uh, he was shaky. Paul criticized him for called him to account, saying, if when before the Judaizers came, you ate with the Gentile Christians. Now that they're here, you're not, you don't want to see them, you don't want to be friends with them, and so forth. That's something like this. And then even Saint Peter himself introduced himself as a fellow elder. I, a fellow elder, 1 Peter 5:1. So those are the things that really mitigate against this. Number one, okay. If number one is down, well, there's no number two to prove. Okay. If Peter wasn't the primate apostle, there is nothing for Peter to hand over as a primacy again to the Bishop of Rome. So um, okay, so but there is one thing that I just like to point out. By the way, the word Pope is sometimes referred to as Pontifex. Pontifex, I made a mistake spelling there. Okay, Pontifex Maximus. Okay, all right. Now, Pontifex Maximus, I should say. Pontifex Maximus. Now, if you've been to the Vatican, like for example, uh, in some of the inscriptions inside the Vatican or a church, it would be said the church, this part of the hall of the church was um, supported by Pope blah blah blah, and Pontifex Maximus would be a title given to that pope. Well, what is that title? Well, that title is the Roman pagan religion for its high priest. That's the name of the before Christianity came. As you know, Pope was pagan. I mean, Rome was pagan, and the name of the title of their high priest for Zeus, for example, and Jupiter, whatever the Roman gods. The name is Pontifex Maximus. Okay, the high priest of the pagan. Now that's interesting why they retain that. I just feel icky about it that they retain this as a title for him. The concept that Peter should be the supreme apostle, as I said, as if he is to rule as sovereign church ruler, is countered, as we said, in this teaching on.
Good. We lost your audio there. Oh, he's lost your audio. Can you hear me? Oh, something happened there. Hold on, I'll give him a message. No.
Oh, yeah.
There we go. We got you back, Doc. Welcome back.
Okay,
We got
yes,
a
I'm back.
question for you. Well,
There
we
we
got
go.
your audio.
Right. Yeah.
Where would you pinpoint are you where it developed? I think where you said the Pope Leo the Great, the first, what,
Yes.
590? I think Calvin said, I think maybe it was him, he said he was the only good Pope. Would you say
Yeah.
that was when it started?
He yes. He was not so bad pope because he didn't want that to be his title. Actually, it was given to him by the Roman emperor. Okay, that was how it started. Now, uh, so at the start, he wasn't really, clamoring for
Your
this.
your audio is a little bit maybe
Hello.
a little bit it's a little bit like the volume is quite low.
Oh, okay. Hold on.
Yep.
Is that okay? Okay. Hold on a second.
You need a little bit more. I'm not sure what happened. Maybe it was
Yes. Okay.
disconnected.
Yeah. Uh, how's that?
Try the. That's
Good.
better.
Is that better? Okay.
Yes, that's better. Thank you
Okay.
for your kind words, Chris Lucas. You are watching from the US. Yes, I'd say reformed as in Anglican, but nah, it's the. I think I don't post as often. I think that's probably why. If you post if you post often, then I think I'd start to get more views. But it's because of work mainly. But yeah, where you from? US? But go on, Doc.
Okay. Yeah. Thanks for that, Lucas. Okay. So, um, when he started, it was a pope. Oh, sorry, the pope was title given by the emperor to him, and then he didn't like it, but he had to wear it, And then the whole tradition came into play. Now they started believing their own own she might say um advertisement by the other people, so and we can talk more about the history of this. I mean you can find a good book on the controversies that happened along the way of this the lives of these popes. Okay, so I mentioned about Ignatius because he used to prove the papacy. He is being used to prove the papacy, okay, in some of his writings. And he is, so the thing is, he's also used to disprove the papacy, okay. So so some believe his writings are forgeries, and some believe the middle or short versions are the ones reliable. I don't have enough time to talk to you to us about some of these 12 or so writings of Ignatius. Some of them are pretty late, although there's a claim by Ignatius that he was the disciple of Saint John and so on. Um, anyway, uh, the long and short of it is, if you Google, the middle recension is believed to be the ones Ignatius is supposed to have written, and some people added text into it, and so on. And there are others also believe that the short version is to be believed, and so on. Anyway, that's a whole scholarship there on Ignatius there. So going now, so uh, at X, I found this brother in Christ. He does a lot of. He's a former Roman Catholic himself. This is I just we'll just call him Pope Leo. Okay, uh, so this friend of mine does a lot of posting on church history, and some of his posts related to the primacy of the Pope and how that's been uh, debunked or not believed by even Roman Catholic. I mean, through Roman Catholic scholars or papacists that are fair in their scholarship. Here's an example: Hans Kung, the Catholic Church Church History. He said, um, for a long time, there has been a consensus among scholars, even Protestant theologians now affirm that Peter suffered a martyr's death in Rome. Conversely, however, Catholic theologians concede that there is no reliable evidence that Peter was even in charge of the Church of Rome, a supreme head or bishop. In any case, the monarchical episcopate was introduced to Rome relatively late. So this hierarchical thing, he believes, and Hans Kung is a Catholic, or was a Catholic. He's dead now. Uh, Scholar. Okay, I think he came from a Dominican background. And here we should um, not forget the matter of qualifications. Unlike Paul, who presumably suffered martyrdom in Rome at the same time, Peter was not an educated Roman citizen, um, but an uneducated Galilean Jew. So, what is he trying to imply there? Where some people are thinking, well, if Peter happens to be not a Roman citizen, the likelihood that he will be chosen or he would be asked to lead the church in Rome is, you know, is down. Okay. Paul could have led the church in Rome, but he didn't. Okay. The thing is, the apostles are separate class of their own. This remember this Jesus made a promise to them. They will be judging the 12 tribes of Israel. Okay. And he told us that we will even be judged of angels. I mean, St. Paul said that. So the apostles are a class of their own. And so they're not the likelihood that they became bishop and so on are quite remote, or that's kind of hard to establish r- right now. For example, okay, so this is one example of a scholar who doesn't believe that uh, Saint Peter was the bishop of Rome. In fact, nobody knows who founded the church in Rome. basically. That's how where scholarship is coming into the to play. Um, and here is another one. Okay, again by Pope Leo. He posted this, and this is coming again from um, a scholar Tex Noble, for example. Um, we read this. Okay, but they are pious romance. Okay, well, he's talking about the one before. And these stories were to be accepted as sober history by some of the greatest minds of early church and so on, Origen, Ambrose, Augustine. But they are pious romance, not history. And the fact is that we have no reliable accounts either of Peter's later life or on the manner or place of his death. Neither Peter nor Paul founded the church at Rome, for there were Christians in the city before either of the apostles set foot there. Nor can we assume, as Irenaeus did, that the apostles established there a succession of bishops to carry on their work in the city. For all the indications are that there was no single bishop of Rome for almost a century. Now, it is recognized the word bishop and presbyter are interchangeable. Okay. So the plurality of eldership, plurality of Presbyterians or bishop, plurality of bishop, we know that that is evident in the book of Acts and the writings of Saint Paul. He talks about elders, assigned elders, people in the plural. Okay, so there's plurality there, and so having something to a person who rises up, maybe first amongst equal, well, that may be a later development, but that wasn't the way the early Christians organized themselves. So here's one example of that scholar who believes. I'm calling to you our Roman Catholic scholars. Okay, so um, here it's a bit hard to read, but let me just give you an example. Okay, um, okay, how is this to be explained? Okay, in it he greeted entire households and mentioned 29 individuals by name, but how long did Peter live in Rome? There was a late 4th century report that he was there for 25 years, but there is no historical basis for this. What is known is that about the year 58, Paul the apostle wrote another to his letter of his letters, this time to the Romans. Okay, in it he greeted the
One
entire
thing, Doc, just
household.
can you zoom in?
Yeah,
Zoom in because I want
can I
them
do
to
that?
read.
Yes. Let me just
So it
try
makes
and
it easier for
how
the
do
listeners, watchers to
yes. How
zoom
do I
in.
make how do I zoom this in? Um,
If it's PowerPoint, I think she'll be able to zoom in.
oh,
Well,
I'm not
Okay,
able
I can
to.
read it, but of course
Yes.
I'm younger. I can.
Uh, I'll read it. Okay, I'm now in this
Yeah,
paragraph.
yeah. Okay.
In it he greeted households and so on. That is surely an astonishing omission of if Peter was residing there. Yes, that's a good point. If Peter was in Rome, he Paul will surely. I mean, of course, we're arguing for silence, but it would be unlikely for Peter not to be mentioned by Paul. Okay, but he never did in the book of Romans. There was no mention of him there. Um, Today, historians suggest that Peter lived in Rome for 3 or 4 years at most. There is no record that he took charge of the community there. It cannot have been automatic. He had not even been bishop in Jerusalem after Jesus' death. James, the Lord's brother, was. Then there is the startling fact in the earliest list of bishops of Rome, Peter's name never appeared. For example, Irenaeus, Bishop Leons from 178 to 200 AD, was the disciple of Polycarp, Bishop of Smyrna, who was himself a disciple of John the Apostle. He enumerated all the Roman bishops up to the 12, Eleutherius, example. According to Irenaeus, the first bishop of Rome was not Peter or Paul, but Linus. The Apostolic Constitution in the year 270 also named Linus as final bishop of Rome, appointed by St. Paul. After Linus came Clement, chosen by Peter. The mystery deepens. In all the writings, Eusebius never once spoke of Peter as Bishop of Rome. How is this to be explained? It seems that in the minds of early Christian commentators, the apostles were a class apart. This is what they're saying. They did not belong to any particular church, nor even when they planted. If that is the case, then there is really no point about the so called papacy or the supremacy of one bishop over the rest. If that's the way uh, they left. Well, you can say this is a later development, but surely you cannot claim it to be apostolic. You can claim it to be, you can do a John Newman on this, development of doctrine, but it's not apostolic. Okay. Um, the Catholic Church has made it a point of faith that popes are successors of St. Peter as Bishop of Rome. But Peter never had that title. He was only invested with it centuries after he died. Naturally, he would have had immense moral authority in the Jewish Christian community in Rome. But unlike Paul, who was a Roman citizen, he would have been a foreigner there. Almost 2,000 years later, another foreigner, a man from a far country, sits in what is known as Peter's chair as the strain of Palestrinia motet soar up into the dome, and so on. So, in other words, uh, yeah, the likelihood that he would have been the Bishop of Rome without, I mean, how can you stay there? I mean, many of these things come into play if he wasn't a Roman citizen, and so on. So there you go. Okay, so the one of the biggest, Daniel, one of the biggest thing that mitigates a bit against this primacy or supremacy of the Bishop of Rome is this one, the Nicene Creed. Okay, the Nicene Creed talks about nothing about supremacy of the Pope, of the Bishop of Rome. It talks nothing about Mariology. It doesn't talk about purgatory. It doesn't talk about praying to dead saints. Okay, or venerating them. It doesn't talk about intercessions of the saints and so on. See, so this is the one of the biggest problem, I think. If people look into history, this is going to be the biggest one problem why the papacy cannot be supported, because uh, this is a ecumenical creed, and that ecumenical creed says nothing that is supposed to be de fide. Okay, that's supposed to be accepted by as faith, as binding, or you are not saved, for example. So the Nicene Creed does not speak about any articles held by the Romanist Church to the present day. Okay, so you can see there, I've listed it all. There's nothing there about uh, supremacy of Bishop of Rome, um, him being the vicar of Christ, and so on, and Mary being sinless, for example, or assumed to heaven, for example, or purgatory. There's no purgatory here. Okay, that's 300 AD. Okay, so that's one example. I think one of the strongest record of
Yeah.
history. Yeah, and
One
then
thing just like
mm,
to mention is, of course, simple as this. If the papacy was around in the time of 325 AD, time of Nicaea, where the Nicene Creed was formulated, then we would see that he would have the final say, as they claim. But we don't see that. Actually, we kind of see maybe more from Constantine uh,
mm,
than anyone else, right? And
mm.
he's absent. The Pope is absent in the Council of Nicaea. I think Luther mentioned something. Is that correct? In his, I think, a large catechism, if I read that somewhere.
Well,
That's where,
in
yeah,
in the treatise of Melanchthon on the primacy of the Pope, okay, on the powers and primacy of the Pope, in his treatise there, we find in the Book of Concord, Melanchthon talks a lot about Council of Nicaea, the canons of Council of Nicaea, and talks about it there. And I I I originally thought about, "Hey, what about the Council of Nicaea?" And then I go find out that, hey, Melanchthon was already talking about this. uh, as a proof that the these Romanist ideas, teachings, have not been recorded in the Council of Nicaea. In other words, they're not apostolic in a sense. It's not something believed in by the Universal Church. It's something in new development. Now I put here a article, "No Place Like Rome, Refuting Papal Primacy with Clement of Rome," Andrew Kopersky. Here's the only way to support this. Okay, I think the thing is, he's talking about with Clement of Rome. Okay, I think Clement of Rome is evidence that primacy is not supposed to be believed or cannot be supported. His conclusion, we just go to his conclusion. In the end, it seems that the Humanian turn will not do here. By Humanian, he means you have to claim development of doctrine. Okay, it's there
Mm.
in the apostolic as a seed. Okay, but it got developed along the way. But the apostolic church, founded by the apostles in the first 100 years, they didn't believe this. Okay, but there was there's a kernel of truth there, and it got elaborated, 700 years later, for example, or 600 years later, and etc. So it in the end, it seems that the Newmanian turn will not do here. That is to say, if doctrine developed, then it appears to have been developing in the wrong direction in the mid 200s. This third century forgery does not attest to a widely shared perspective that somehow anticipates the rather ultramontane ecclesiology of Boniface the Eighth and so forth. Instead, uh, Pastor Clement's letter to James rather challenges it or qualifies it beyond recognition. One easily imagines that had the papal chancellery of 1302 addressed any other prelate of the day with such grand titulature in a letter, Boniface and most other Latin Christians would have been quite put out indeed. But we perhaps get ahead of ourselves here. Just a year after he had officially declared obedience to Roman pontiff to be prerequisite for salvation, Boniface narrowly escaped lynching in his own hometown, instigated by the King of France and two deposed cardinals, while drawing support from a significant contingent of the locals. Apparently, the actors all had missed the memo. Okay, so um, the point here is that um, it appears that the letters of Clement of Rome, for example, uh, mitigates against the idea that there was a one supreme bishop
Mm.
in Rome. So anyway, I think that's where we conclude this, and
Yeah.
yeah, I mean on
We've
time,
got
right?
Chris Lucas saying, yep, about roughly about that. Doesn't matter necessarily in some sense. So we see here Polycarp learned from John directly, yet the Roman bishop and Cetus
Hmm.
made claims he couldn't prove about Peter and Paul, saying it's okay to celebrate Easter. Thank you
Yes,
for the comment
that's
there. And
the.
again, he says, I think the Passover debate between Polycarp and the Roman bishop and Cetus flies in the face of the apostolic authority of
Yeah,
succession claims.
the claims.
Yeah,
Yes.
I mean,
Yeah.
right.
Good point.
There's even also something, if you remember, Cyprian
Hmm.
saying something like someone, I don't know who it was, forgot the name, roughly around maybe 230. Wait, Cyprian wasn't, uh, bishop, you could say, from about 250, right? Because he was
Hmm.
a martyr about 258 AD. So someone's, I think it was so-called Pope Stephen, um, right? Do you know anything about that? I think my reading it, Henry Chadwick, I think he was a church historian, says something like there was a claim to authority by the Roman bishop around that time. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think I've run across Pope Stephen. You mentioned there, but there is a um, it's a running in the suspicion that this is a development of doctrine to prop up, for example, the supremacy claim and what you call this? I would call this tribal claim. Tribalism basically, or triumphalistic claim here is um, a the evidence here is just when I just look at the uh, Nicene Creed, for example, um, it's a, a if this is going to be faith for salvation, for example, why isn't it there?
Yeah.
That's the whole point. That alone is a big factor of why you should doubt these claims, um, because early documents or agreed upon by Christians of earlier period, uh, which they consider as ecumenical creeds accepted by everybody there. How come it's not there? How come this peculiar Roman Catholic beliefs are not there? Uh, so that's why the only reason to prove this, Daniel, is that as this author said, you have to do a John Newman on this. Okay, Cardinal John Newman uh, posted this idea of development of doctrine. Oh, it's there in the corner. For example, the Immaculate Conception of Mary. He says some people might say doing a Newmanesque uh, style of argumentation, saying that okay, well, yes, we can say that it wasn't believed by them, but it's there as a kernel, And you say, okay, where's the kernel there? Where's this core? And you have to do a lot of philosophizing and a lot of rationalization in order to get to that one, which is basically sophistry. Basically, you delve into some kind of sophistic reasoning. I mean, many people don't understand this, what we mean by sophistry, basically. And the reformers charge the magisterium of sophistry. In other words, they're changing the definition of the word, the usual understanding of the way the word is used, and give it a little bit of a spin so that their rationalization to justify a certain practice or belief is um, is made to float, made to fly. So uh, that's the whole. I mean, from that angle alone, I mean, the Council of Nicaea, for example, from that angle, in the creed, if it's going to be, I would say, if it's going to be de fide, something that you have to believe in order to be saved, it should be there. Okay, it should be there. Uh, it's important. Um, Jesus dying on the cross for all sins for all us. The gospel is there in the Nicene Creed, for example. Of course, came from Scripture, uh, but yeah, that's where I would stand. So that's why all of this argumentation of church fathers here and there. I mean, of course, they're helpful uh, too, very very helpful indeed. But you have to there are several pieces of evidences that you can look into as well. There's scripture, there's practice, and so. And when you mentioned about Anacletus and Polycarp going doing some argumentation and so forth, it seems to me that was the if there is such a tradition in the early Christians, that was the tradition of ironing things out, of having. So in other words, it's basically a consensus of ideas. Now, many people think that you I would go into a discussion with Roman Catholics, and they will immediately, the topic is X, suddenly they insert Luther into the discussion as if Luther was uh, the Protestant pope, and he wasn't. Okay, it's because Luther subjected himself into his colleagues. So it's, in other words, a community is a consensual um, method uh, deliberation. Basically, it wasn't Luther saying you should believe this and so forth. It was subjective. That's why when those confessions were made, they were made by fellow believers. Here's the evidence. from scripture, you go look at it. You know, do you see whether it's sound, what I'm proposing is sound or not. You know, so people could. Um, um, that's part of it. There's nobody who's supposed to be. Um, I'm the supreme leader, and what I say goes. What I say to you is binding because I have divine right. I was given whatever I bind will be bound in heaven. Whatever I lose will be loosed in heaven as well. So um, that's that's not the way it seems that church history worked. I think I lost you. Keep on talking. Okay, let me just. Oh, let me just go back. Hello, I lost you, Daniel. Okay, Daniel. Thank you. Hope this helped.